I have the great privilege in my life to work with a number of women in a 12-step program. I'm their sponsor. You may know that a sponsor is someone who helps another person work through the steps, someone to call on when the challenges of life on this side of sobriety or whatever behavior you're working on, when those challenges become too overwhelming. I am so fortunate to start most mornings of my week with a call from one sponsee or another. These women start my day with intention and positive connection. I treasure these relationships, many of them years long. It is through these conversations that I began thinking about what it would mean to create a no-shame zone. It is through these conversations that I heard story after story that included feelings of shame, often a paralyzing sense that nothing would ever be good enough because they themselves were not good enough. So I determined that I would, as far as I was able, that I would not add to anyone else's shame, that I would work to catch myself and stay away from words that denigrate or humiliate. And I found, really, this is such a no-brainer, but it's so much more rewarding to be someone's cheerleader or coach or guide or friend than it is to pile on when someone's feeling bad. And it's in my power to do that, to catch myself, to keep from piling on. And if I can do that for others, surely I would be able to do that for myself. Aha. That's the hard part. Research sociologist Brené Brown works in the areas of shame and vulnerability and courage. Are you all familiar with the work of Brené Brown? Do you know her? She's got a great TED Talk, and she's written several wonderful books. She's got a Netflix special out now. She says, here's how she describes shame: as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. She talks a lot about what we are seeking, those connections that you talked about up here, to be worthy of love and belonging. And shame is that feeling that we are inherently not worthy of that. Other sociologists and psychologists say that it includes feelings of distress, exposure, mistrust, powerlessness, and worthlessness. Man, that's a heavy load. And it's important to distinguish between shame and guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. You see that distinction? Guilt is about a thing you've done, but shame is about something you believe you are. Brené Brown says in this 1, 2, 3 about shame that we all have it, that it's universal and one of the most primitive emotions. I think there's something that many of us in the room here prize about being able to rise above emotion. Let us come to assembly from the neck up. We like to think about things, have a certain level of knowledge, and no one likes to be emotionally manipulated. And we'll face it, not everyone in the room, but many of us are come-outers, right? We come out of other faith traditions or maybe no faith tradition. And lots of us have plenty of experience of being emotionally manipulated on a Sunday morning, sitting in a pew, singing in between the hymn sandwich, right? We can call it church or not church, but we know what it is to be emotionally manipulated, right? Nobody likes that. But we have and experience these deep, profound, primal human emotions. And if we think we don't have these human emotions, maybe we're a little sociopathic. So it's good to recognize that we do have them. It's good to recognize that we have them. The second point is we're all afraid to talk about our shame. Why would we? If the premise is that we feel like we're not good enough, why in the world would you want to talk about that? That's the very thing you don't want to talk about. But that's the catch. The less we talk about it, the more control it has over our lives. Shame derives its power from being unspeakable. And so that's why it loves us perfectionists. That's why it loves perfectionists, right? We can't ever be good enough to be perfect. We can't be good enough to be perfect. Did you get that? We can't be good enough to be perfect. And so if we can name shame and speak it, we remove its power. Brene Brown says, shame hates having words wrapped around it. To speak shame is to remove its power. And so she talks about in her work several categories of shame that she has found in her research. And they include things like appearance and body image, money and work, parenting. You talked about the difficulty of parenting. Who can possibly be good enough to be up to the task, right? Mental and physical health, addiction, sex, aging. And the one I'd like to focus on is being stereotyped or labeled. That can be a place of shame, to be stereotyped or labeled. This is where we come to my thesis. Let's see if I can work this out here with us today. My thesis is that shame about white supremacy culture impedes white liberals from making the change we need for a more just and compassionate world. And compassion and curiosity are the tools we can use to counter shame and get on with the work. I'm going to say it again because I really need to hear it again because there's a lot to unpack in here. Shame about white supremacy culture impedes white liberals from making the change we need for a more just and compassionate world. And using compassion and curiosity, and I'll add courage and humility, those are the tools we can use to counter shame and get on with the work. So stay with me as I try to connect these thoughts. You all know that I quote frequently from Robin DiAngelo and her book, White Fragility. This is a book that I feel like I've been waiting for all my life, and I return to again and again. I think White Fragility is a brilliant book. Robin DiAngelo is a white woman who works in racial equity work, and she's a trainer and speaks to other white people a great deal. And so I think she speaks to me. Let me say it that way. She says that prior to the civil rights movement, it was socially acceptable for white people to openly proclaim their belief in their racial superiority. Okay? For the civil rights movement, it was socially acceptable to do that. But when white Northerners saw the violence that Black people, including women and children, endured during the civil rights protest, they were appalled. And I want to lift up that was actually part of the strategy of Dr. Martin Luther King, was to show what happened. And so it would raise awareness and the consciousness of people who would be appalled. That was the goal. These images became the archetype of racists. right? Bull Connor with the fire hose and we know the pictures, right? You know the pictures. After the civil rights movement, to be a good moral person and to be complicit in racism became mutually exclusive. You could see that this is what a racist looked like. That act was a racist act. And so to be a good moral person was to be not that. You could not be a good moral person and participate in some of the horrors that were now being able to be seen. Only bad people were racist, and they were Southern. She says, as a Southerner. Northern whites use these images to position racists as always Southern, right? That's how it works. So to accomplish this adaptation, I'm still quoting Robin DiAngelo here, racism first needed to be reduced to simple, isolated, and extreme acts of prejudice. These acts must be intentional, malicious, and based on a conscious dislike of someone because of their race. In other words, racists were mean and ignorant and old and uneducated Southern whites. Nice people, well-intentioned people, open-minded middle-class people, people raised in the enlightened North, by this definition, could not be racist. Isn't that tidy? So tidy the way it worked out. She says, within this paradigm, to suggest that I am a racist is to deliver a deep moral blow, a kind of character assassination. And having received this blow, I must defend my character. And that is where all my energy will go, into defending my character, to deflecting the charge rather than reflecting on my behavior. In this way, this good-bad binary makes it nearly impossible to talk to white people about racism, especially good, well-meaning, right-thinking, liberal white people. It's really hard to talk about racism, about how it works, how it shapes all of us, and the inevitable ways we are conditioned to participate in it. Man, those words just leap right off the page to me. Because I am a good, even though I'm from the South, I am a good-thinking, well-meaning, correctly voting. Boy, am I correctly voting. I think the right things and I say the right things, and that can't mean me. It cannot mean me. And that is something that's really hard to wrestle with. It took me quite a while to get to this and to begin to recognize that when people of color whom I value their thinking and the way they present ideas and challenges to me without saying, but not me, I'm one of the good ones, right? Without being defensive about it and not allowing my energy. I love the way she says that about all my energy goes into deflecting the blow and not reflecting on how this system of white supremacy damages every one of us. African-American scholar and filmmaker Omowale Akatende says that racism is systemic, societal, institutional, omnipresent, and epistemologically embedded phenomenon that pervades every vestige of our society, of our reality. For most whites, however, racism is like murder. The concept exists, but someone has to commit it in order for it to happen. Remember what we said before? It had to be a single incident, it was malicious, it was pre-planned, that sort of thing. This limited view of such a multi-layered syndrome cultivates the sinister nature of racism, and in fact, it perpetuates racist phenomena rather than eradicates it. So, it's all big. It's big and it's heavy and it's hard. And so, what does it mean to us, and what can we do? How do we continue to be present in the face of it? Well, I'm thinking of one of our aspirations. Theo Bubser read it this morning. Our aspiration to make the change we need for a more just and peaceful world. I've always heard this as making the change out there. And we do that. We work hard on making the change out there with our Active Voices group and our many people who have been at the Capitol this week. And Jim, Reverend Jim, who gave that beautiful message to open the Senate session at the Capitol, beautiful humanist message, which you can see on our newly launched YouTube channel. Yeah. If you go to YouTube and put in First Unitarian Society, you can see Reverend Jim and David and lots of pieces of things. And I just am going to pause for one moment and give a big shout out and thank you to Justin Bovey, who is a new member and is doing really... He has brought his deep, deep tech nerdiness to really do something good in the world and move our message out in the world. The ways many of us take our values out into the community. But there's another piece to this too, and I don't know why, but it's taken me until just recently to get this. To make the change we need for a more just and compassionate world is to make the change in here. To make the change in here, to make the change in here. To think in new ways, to be willing to think of my own complicity and the ways I was failed by the educational system that didn't teach me about racism in ways that I could confront it. Because it doesn't want to be confronted, you see. White supremacy culture acts like shame. It doesn't want to be talked about. It doesn't want to be confronted. If you do not believe that we good-thinking, well-meaning, correctly voting white liberals are not part of the problem, I so hope that you will continue to listen to voices of color who say, oh, you got to get this. You got to get this. I've heard so many people say that there's something when you're confronted with those obvious, in-your-face, white nationalists, racists, that you know exactly where you stand. But it's the sweet folks, the sweet, well-meaning folks that can really do some major damage through microaggressions and so on. It's hard to be wrong. None of us want to be wrong. And to be called out or to be labeled refers back to that shame. We have a piece of shame about it, and then we get stuck in shame and can't move forward. But the strategy of being the smartest person in the room is not working for us. Many of us well-educated folks, we like to be the smartest person in the room. And it's not working for us so well. It is killing us. It is killing the world. White supremacy culture and the greed of capitalism and the oppression of racism, those three things going together are literally killing the world and people around us. Humility and curiosity, compassion and courage, these are the antidotes to this paralyzing condition of saying, it's those other folks, it's not me. I've said this before, I expect when I do the work of anti-oppression and anti-racism and working in this field that I will make mistakes. I may be making a big one right now. I expect to make mistakes. Just like when I drive my car, I expect to get a ding on it. If I am afraid of making a mistake, I will never step out to do the work. Right? Mistakes come with the territory. So Brene Brown says, what do we do about shame and how can we challenge it. We have to develop shame resilience, to recognize shame and understand its triggers, to begin to know when I am in its grip, to reach out and speak shame, as hard as it is to tell the story of my shame. She says, tell your story to someone who has earned the right to hear it. I say I would no more go without therapy than I would without brushing my teeth. I believe in therapy, but it doesn't have to be therapy. It can be many other ways of speaking. This summer, we will have a young intern working with us, a person of color who comes from the Ethical Culture Society, Jay Hooper. And next fall, another young person of color, our own staff member, Felicia Philibert, who is a social worker, and she'll be working with us on developing an internal racial equity framework and implementing some anti-oppression strategies. Felicia and I are working on a grant to fund this work as we strive for collective liberation. How will we greet these people? And how will we greet ourselves in relationship in the midst of reaching for something new? Will we commit microaggressions? I'm pretty sure of it. I'm pretty sure I will. I was raised and soaked in white supremacy culture. I can't not do that. But I can be self-aware and self-forgiving. And I hope that Jay and Felicia and other people of color with whom we work will have grace to me as we walk through this. And how can we have forgiveness for ourselves? I hope I will have grace for myself. And maybe feel guilt, but not shame. That we can work with courage, work of the heart, and compassion for self, for others, for each other. That we can be cheerleaders for each other as we do the work. And humility and deep patience, because it's a long, long road. And happily, we are on it together.